Welcome to Prime Suspects, here with the usual suspects, Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr. I'm your host, Matt Landis. Today's topics, the Prime Sports point of view on Ohio after the state's betting handle surpassed the $1 billion milestone in January, a rare glimpse into Joe's and Adam's perspectives on what the recreational books are getting right, and a spotlight on betting startups and innovation. Diving into the latest from inside Prime Sports, Ohio recorded its third biggest month in state history in January, with sports betting handle exceeding $1 billion, lending itself to a discussion on the Buckeye State from Prime's perspective. Adam, we'll kick it off with you. And aside from the fact that the bettors can be awfully sharp there, as evidenced by your weekly updates this past NFL season, what have you learned about bettors across Ohio?
So when it comes to the numbers now, I've got no clue. I've got no idea if $1 billion was a lot for them or not for them. I mean, it just doesn't matter anymore. We're in the market and we're trying to grow our own. Right now, we're not even a pimple on the ass of a lot of these operators. So I don't know what our piece of that 1.01 billion was. Maybe it was the 0.01. But right now, again, generally for us, we're seeing more assassins and not really when I say not really an educated bunch, the arbitrages aren't there. We do have our bridge jumper, which always brings us entertainment. So that might be some good volume that we do add to the monthly count. I just really haven't dove into it too much. We've sort of been trying to look at the product and stay alive, keep our head above water. I sort of watched, what others, those exiting the market. And we're obviously in the back of our mind looking at the taxes and, 40% tax, I'd be looking to just pull the plug and get out of there straight away. Not sure we can or what the legalities of all that are, but Ohio for me is one state that I've really wanted to jump into more, being up in Michigan in particular. So, the numbers, it seems like they're good. I sort of, it was a good return from January, from December. Looks like books are getting back on track. Looking at the retail number, just another example of why I don't want to do retail, like we saw in Colorado's numbers that come out last week. So right now, for us, we're just seeing sharp players out of Ohio. So it's sort of the challenge that we're fighting right now when it comes to that.
I heard you mention wanting to keep your head above water, and sometimes a good way to do that can be diversification. Knowing Prime operates across two states right now, how would you say bettors in Ohio would compare and contrast to bettors in New Jersey?
For us, it's just professionals in Ohio. We're getting a big mix of arbitrages in New Jersey. So maybe it just needs a bit of an education to others in Ohio on how to arbitrage and how to take advantage of those weaker spots that they may not have been kicked out or limited from. For me, I saw Ohio as a really good state. There's, multiple spots. You got Columbus in the middle, Cincinnati down on the Kentucky border, heads waiting for us to get Kentucky live. Cleveland and the sort of top areas where they cross over the border as well. We really haven't done a great job in marketing. 100%, that's probably one of our biggest failures right now. And that's sort of where we're starting to sort of look at how do we actually get in? How do we get noticed? How do we brand? How do we get attention? How do we get all those kind of things? So right now I am reading Day Trading Attention by Gary Vee. So bit by bit, we're, trying to pick up some bits and pieces on, we need players. Ultimately, at the end of the day, our business runs on the need of liquidity and volume, which means players. So that's where we're at right now in trying to identify New Jersey type of players, which I think we're doing well in that market, knowing that space. Now that Planetech is in Arizona, we're starting to see variables down there that have been good so far. But Ohio is the one that I think we really need to just dive into a bit heavier and see what we can find out about the actual players. And they're bettors. I mean, the volume shows that they like to bet. So that's where we need to get better at the marketing and the attention, the branding, and kind of understanding what they're looking for ultimately.
And Joe, as Adam speaks to diving in heavier when it comes to Ohio, I'm going to ask you to zoom out and tell us more broadly, how do you describe the overall operating environment in the Buckeye State?
What it was like for our first two football seasons is Ohio is much more concentrated as far as our handles coming from a smaller cohort of pretty big players. We have our ubiquitous bridge jumper who, everybody's got his eye on him. I'm really glad he got down on Ohio State versus Michigan this past year. It was one of the more memorable ones. But then after him, the liquidity is really concentrated in some really serious guys who are really tough to beat. We've beat them, but they're just really tough to beat. When I look at Ohio and how that the money is so concentrated at the top of our roster, our player roster, amongst like, half dozen to 10 players. And you compare it to New Jersey. New Jersey, our roster is a little deeper. The liquidity is a little more evenly spaced between a bigger cohort of players who are also very sharp. But I think, again, that's like going back to what Adam's talking about. I think that might be largely a result of the higher number of arbitrage players that we have in New Jersey. All this says is that we know we can attract sharp players. We know that the player who is looking for a home for their liquidity is easy for us to capture. And so that means going forward, it's like, okay, well, we know that we have those guys in hand. As long as we don't piss them off, as long as we keep the doors open to them, really the focus is like, okay, well, what do smaller players really like? And it's beyond like, okay, they want a lot of free money. Yeah, everybody wants a lot of free money. Elon Musk would love a lot of free money. That's not really a differentiator. It's not how to think about marketing. It's what are other areas that we're not capitalizing on? And this is something that everybody has to think about. It's not just Prime. Everybody has to think about going forward. Like, how do you start to know the audience a little better? What are their pain points? What is it that they really like? Let's get deeper on analysis. For a small outfit like Prime, it's an imperative to do that. For the bigger guys, it's probably more of an opportunity to better deploy the resources that they have and not just rely on megatonnage drops of free bonus money and branding campaigns. So, I mean, the bottom line is it was funny for how long we would say, oh yeah, we're getting killed by sharps in Ohio, and people just snickered and like, sharps in Ohio. Oof. It's funny listening to the fucking Vegas crowd sometimes. They don't think that there's anybody sharp outside of the city limits, which is a joke, and it shows how provincial they can be sometimes. I'm talking about the players. I'm not talking about the guys behind the counter, but I think people really would get their eyes open by some of the people who are playing into us and just how tough of a player that really is there. There's a real opportunity, not just for Prime, but for other shops if they're willing to open their doors to those guys.
I think that lends itself to a nice transition here as we pivot from a deep dive on one book in one market to a look at leading books across the market at large, our water cooler segment this week. Let's call this a bye week for bashing the rec books and instead explore what they're doing right. And with FanDuel reporting major U.S. growth during its Q4 earnings report last week, clearly someone is doing something right. Joe, putting on your product analyst hat, what do you see the rec books doing well these days?
If there's one thing I think that those guys have done very, very well, and it's in comparison to what the industry was like when it was still, 100% gray market, right? And even an improvement on when they were just DFS, it's in the realm of payments. Okay. And I'm going to talk specifically about paying in, since we know an awful lot of people, there's an awful lot of complaints about getting money out. But, how quickly payments get processed, how quickly stuff gets credited to your account, the ease at which they do that, it's made that part of the business, which could be a difficult part of the business in the past. That's something like the great American general, Omar Bradley, said, like, good generals think in strategy or think in tactics. Great generals think in logistics. And stuff like payments is so important to the players. It should be the most important thing. This is a game about playing for money. If they can't get their money in and they can't get their money out quickly, easily, with not a whole lot of friction, that would be a big problem. But that's one thing that those guys getting into the marketplace, opening the doors, and made it easier for us and come in as a late follow to just, it's a higher standard that's available to us, even from the get-go. And it's obviously something that's really important to the players. The other thing is, and this is definitely more anecdotal, is now how, and this is going to sound weird, how commonplace sports betting is now. What I'll use as an example is for a long, long time, people ask me like, well, what do you do? I'd say like, oh, I'm a consultant. And they'd say like, well, what industry? And I'd say sports data. Because if you said sports betting, well, it was only legal in one state, and people would wonder like, oh, geez, well, you can imagine a lot of judgmental stuff. Now, I still feel that reluctance to say like, oh yeah, I'm involved in sports betting when I'm in mixed company, right? You never know how people are going to react. But when people do find out, now it's like, even like the most people I think would be the most uptight are like, sports betting, that's so cool. And then they start opening up to you, and everybody, it really is amazing to see how quickly it's become just like any other consumer product. We didn't do that. That is definitely the Fan Kings guys and those other brands doing that. Now, maybe it's a little too commonplace, a little too acceptable. I had a conversation with my brother a week ago who was bemoaning the fact that my nephew, who just got accepted to Indiana University, congratulations, we're flooding the Big Ten here with the Brennans. But, talking about like, oh yeah, all his friends in high school, they all bet parlays. I got to tell them to stop, tell them not to do that. And I was like, wait a second. We're talking about high school kids and they all got accounts at like the big guys. I know we're not supposed to be bashing them, but like, okay, maybe it's gotten a little too commonplace, a little too acceptable that parents are saying like, oh, sure, I'll just open an account for my kid who's underage, essentially commit fraud while doing it. But it is interesting to see how in just, we're 7 years from PASPA, just it's everywhere. And like I said, that's largely the responsibility of the big brands and the way they've landed that one. And then the last one I'd say is more specific to like BetMGM and Caesars, where they recognize, I'd say BetMGM's still kind of trying to hang with the front two a little bit. They're still marketing pretty strong about like king of sportsbooks and everything. But I think overall they've recognized is like, look, we're an extension of our casino brands, our full casino companies. And they've kind of pulled it back a little bit and made it more of a broader strategy. They know what they are. Especially Caesars has really pulled it back and said like, we're a casino company first, then we're a sports betting company. So kind of knowing what, there's a few participants in the marketplace that have really gotten to the point where they know who they are. They kind of figured it out and they're staying in their lane instead of trying to, outduel the Coke and Pepsi guys at the top of the marketplace.
Well, as somebody who resides in California and has to get creative at times with getting down in certain markets, I will definitely say your first point about frictionless payment resonates and has gone a long way in my experience. And also to the point of ubiquity, having a full-time job in a separate industry. Years ago, sports betting was not on the table as a topic of conversation, and now it's something that others will frequently initiate with me. So I hear you there. And Adam, when it comes to Joe's points about payments, ubiquity, knowing who you are, anything to add or any other topics that really stand out to you in terms of what the rec books seem to be getting right?
Well, they've converted the small players. I mean, that was the whole point of it, was converting the small players that didn't have to go through the process of whether it was buying crypto to get it offshore or anything of that nature. Definitely on the UI experience, while some of them, I find them friction in the way. Other people just, they one-click betting with their same-game parlays and the way that the banners are set up on the front, things and like that. But remember, this isn't FanDuel. This is Flutter. And as we can see with Flutter, as they keep going around buying up local heroes and everything like that, that's what they did with FanDuel. I believe one of, or if not the biggest market cap gaming company on the planet. So, a little sort of offside to DraftKings. Don't feel too bad because this isn't FanDuel. This is Flutter. And they're the ones running behind the engine, whether it's an N10 or a Bet365 and things like that. So they've definitely pushed this beyond what everyone was looking at it for. I get the issues that people are seeing with responsible gaming and the underage stuff and things like that. Yes, I'm responsible and make sure that we've got all those things in place, the checks and balances and those aspects of it. But they've just opened up a market. They're gone from one state to 37 states, something like that in 7 years on the sports betting side. Sports betting's kind of getting whacked across the face a little bit with that, based on them thinking that's sort of the hellfire of gaming. Wait till iGaming casinos are on every phone in 50 states.
We're staying positive, Adam. We're staying positive.
A bye week from the bashing.
No, this isn't bashing the
Sure.
big ones. I mean, they're ultimately laying this out. They're doing a great job in building from zero. I mean, DraftKings and FanDuel were both literally on their deathbeds going into PASPA, as far as I understand. So what they've done in 7 years to turn this around, it's phenomenal. Their products, the same game parlays, the way that they're just bleeding their customers, they're doing what they need to do. If that's your goal, is to make money, they're making shit ton of fucking money. At times I wish that I could look at sports betting that way instead of looking at it from sort of a competitive nature, being a professional athlete in sports betting, being able to compete on all levels. And if it was all about money, they're doing it the right way.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and give Joe the gold star for staying on topic with that segment, but maybe Adam gets the gold star when it comes to delivering the more engaging answer. So with that,
Ow. That hurt.
we will pivot from established market leaders to emerging market leaders and our look ahead segment. The next New York City Summit is taking place tomorrow and Thursday for those of you catching this episode on the day of its release. And both Joe and Adam will be in attendance. One highlight on the agenda for all three of us, a visit tomorrow night to the Starties, a new gaming award show focused exclusively on startups in the industry. Joe and Adam, with that theme in mind, let's pretend you're each starting new companies next week. And for each of you, starting with Joe, what kind of company do you start and why do you think it's a good opportunity?
Our good friend and preeminent attorney, Jeff Riffer, I must say to him at least once a week, every week for, I don't know, the last 15 years, why are we not in payments? That's where the money is. You could have a great sportsbook product. You could have a great brand. You don't have good payments in and out. You don't have a business. You don't have tax money. You don't have any of that stuff. But I think rather than just saying like, oh yeah, I'd like to just line up next to the rest of the guys and get my like 2.9% plus 30-cent transaction charge for every charge that goes in and out. I don't have to worry about, whether I got a flat book or acquiring customers or anything like that. I just sit back and scoop water out of the river. That sounds great, doesn't it? It's such a lost opportunity or missed opportunity. Some of the things that are problems in the industry, I do wonder sometimes if the payments part of the industry is where, some solutions can be found, whether it is our responsible game, rather than waiting necessarily for the sports books or the gaming operators to be screening for problem players that look, I mean, we've probably all had this, like with our credit cards. Credit cards do vectoring. They do a lot of analysis about them. Like if you're somebody who spends a couple of, your spending patterns here, and then the next thing you know, your credit card transaction pops up in San Francisco and you're at a sushi bar or something like that. Like American Express is like, hey, is this really you? That's not really your style. And so being able to proactively keep an eye on people about behavioral stuff and spending stuff, that's something that the credit card companies do very, very well already. And it seems like that's an area, at least payments generally, where for certain problems like problem gaming and also frankly like VIP and other issues is where things I think there's more opportunities there and it's currently under leveraged. And yeah, that would definitely be something if there's anybody listening out there in VC land, yeah. I would definitely be interested in something like that.
I can see a nice connection between that answer and the way you led off with your comments in our previous segment.
No, it wasn't intentional. It really wasn't.
Yeah, no, it's nice when we can connect the dots in creative ways. I think that can be pretty eye-opening for the right people. And Adam, I'm curious as to whether or not your answer here might also dovetail with any of your most recent comments, or if it's going to take us in a different direction.
Well, funny, as it so happens, I was in a room only just a week and a half ago looking at a product that Joe just very well laid out. So they are out there, and there is one that I am looking at right now. For me, again, it's another way of gambling. This is where I've started to gamble in companies and people and CEOs. So there is an interest on what's out there. When I did look at the Starties list, maybe knew 4 or 5 of them. When I did look at the finalist lists, I do have a horse in the race. So there is an interest of diving in a little bit further on that. I just want to be on the end of all these things, taking bets, whether they're acquiring customers, whether they're modeling, whether they're, all these 60 odd product features. I'm just looking to plug them all in or plug as many as possible and just take bets. I've sort of looked at opportunities that have come along on where I may be able to get in this space. And that's where I'm getting into it, is gambling or betting on some of these companies and ultimately hoping that they grow into something and being able to give them a leg up as well, plugging them into Planetech or Prime Sports or BetChris or something like that. But as to just like veering down a path on trying to set up something new and whatnot, I'm just at the back end. I just want to take bets. That's what I'm here for. I've realized that that's why I'm alive. I'm here to take bets. And as many as possible, as quickly as possible, in as many jurisdictions as possible, for as much liquidity as possible. It's, I think PASPA's really opened up the door for a lot of people to sort of go out there and try new things. We've seen some that have been phenomenally successful on exits, whether they were worth it or not our call. But generally, it's a very interesting space. There's a broad range of new people trying to get into it one way or another. I'm just looking for the good stuff to either gamble on them and back them on their journey or plug them in. So that's sort of all I've got to feedback on this space. Is I'll start looking at these sort of more and more as we start moving in a direction of consolidating. We've got a lot of things on deck over the next few months in development, but some of these things are easy wins and easy plugins, and that's ultimately where I'm looking at when it comes to new ventures that are popping up.
So just to kind of come back on this, is specifically looking at the list that we have for the starties and looking at all the companies, not just the finalists. It's very easy. Like, you saw a lot of people once this got legalized in the United States, everybody wanted to get into like the big sexy plays, like platforms, risk odds and risk management stuff and game content, right? Because that's the stuff that's the fun part of the industry. But the nuts and bolts stuff, the infrastructure stuff behind all of that is, if anything, now is maybe more important as we kind of like turn a corner in the industry, and we've, new states coming on and growing the business that way has slowed down significantly. And maybe some time before you see, more than a single state added a year to the current, map of legalization map. The industry's now got to turn more into a retention and customer satisfaction mindset. If there's one thing we know, is that we all throw off a ton of data, right? We throw off a ton of data, and it would be great to have better tools, better ways of engaging in analysis to be able to look at that, like look at retention, look at personalization, look at those things. There's a lot of talk about it. There's not a whole lot of action about it. It was interesting to see that a couple of those companies in the starties were the unsexy but back-end data analysis, how to know more, how to better serve your customer, how to, cut them into different cohorts and get into personalization. That's stuff that, especially now that everybody's got, if you can get AI into your pitch deck as well, doing it more so on the cohort analysis stuff, the data analysis stuff, where people can get much better at retention, I think is really interesting, versus like, hey, we're gonna revolutionize odds making. Oh boy, I wish I had $1 for each one of those pitch books that I read over the last 7 years.
Well, plenty of good food for thought. We'll go ahead and wrap up on that note. To the audience, if you'll be at the Starties tomorrow night, please say hello. And if not for the open bar, I'd say drinks on Joe. Wherever your week takes you, we appreciate you making us a part of it. Thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.